Welcome to the Crypto Swamp Creatures, the show you never knew you needed and still don't want anyways. I'm Christopher Alexander, your blockchain and advocacy communications expert.
And I'm Justin Wallen, your guide through the often murky world of politics and polling.
Every week, we dive into the intersection of crypto, policy, and politics without taking sides. We're here to give you the straight, data-driven analysis that influences the decisions of those who want to win or want to be elected.
Think of it as a late 80s newscast, but with a twist. We bring you the serious stuff, but with a dash of sardonic wit and just a hint of irreverence.
So whether you're a crypto enthusiast, a policy wonk, or just someone who appreciates a data-driven approach, this is your place.
We bring you both sides, weigh the impact on crypto, and then we share what we use for show prep every week on our meeting.
So remember, no one is as smart as someone who agrees with you, and now get ready to enter the no swamp zone. All right, welcome to episode 2 of what I think mathematically has to be America's fastest growing crypto politics podcast. I think we've gone up 100% when Justin Wallen followed our accounts. So great to be back. One thing I kind of think about is why should people listen to this? And, we pointed out last week, people pay you and I, Justin, to help hold office, to get legislation passed, to get projects approved. And so here's your chance to kind of listen to us. And I think last week I pointed out you also are capable of getting a table at La Diplomat on short notice, which should be a statement of credentials. So I'll add this week, we both wear expensive suits made of fine Italian cloth made by tailors. So, if you're not going to listen now, I don't know what you're doing.
We have some interesting stuff to start off with, which is my catnip. And I'm going to kick it over to you, but it is tangentially and importantly related to polling. But what's the latest in that other shadowy underworld of gambling polling?
Well, it's funny when you and I were kind of talking about this, you boiled it down to one word I thought is really interesting, which is probability. And so in the crypto Twitter's tubes, cyber transoms, where you're seeing a lot of buzz about Polymarket. And Polymarket is based on, I'm presuming, DARPA's terrorism futures market experiments in the early 2000s, where they had experts treat geopolitical events for long shorts and other kind of using trading strategies to kind of do like a crowdsourcing, collective wisdom, Malcolm Gladwell, guess how many marbles are in the jar type approach. And it's getting a lot of attention. And I've been a bit critical of it because it has diverged so far from polling. When I told you, I kind of joked, Polymarket, by the way, you cannot access as a U.S. citizen presently. So it seems to tell me what people who don't live in the United States and don't understand how our political system works thinks what's happening right now. It has Kamala Harris up higher than any poll. And, Justin, would love sort of your take. This idea of kind of crowdfunding betting markets to determine probability of outcomes, one, and two, what can we really take from these platforms when they're at their best, and what's wrong with them at their worst?
Yeah. So they're they're fun. That's why they exist. They're entertainment. They're also cocktail chatter, which is why we're talking about them. But it being 9 a.m, we're not actually drinking cocktails. So they can be accurate, but they work in the world of, as you mentioned, probabilities. So unlike polls, which we'll get to in a moment, and by the way, one of the key inputs for these things to actually work is the various quality of their data inputs. They rely on inputs. They're put together by statisticians, by smart people. Nate Silver is associated with this. Nate is no dummy. He works in the world of probabilities. His site, the site that he's no longer affiliated with, but he's famous with, 538, is all about probabilities. And most folks who follow kind of baseball and these sorts of things, they get it. But the reality is most people who exist don't get it. So Nate will say, I think something's going to happen, and I put a probability of 30% that it's going to happen. Or in this case,
kind of align it with Polymarket, I think that Kamala Harris is going to, what was it? It's going to 52% chance she's going to win the presidency. And that's presumably, assuming they took into place 3 different candidates, which they kind of forget to do a lot for overseas folks. That leaves probably somewhere around 40% for Trump, and I don't know, 7%, whatever it is for the next scion of the Kennedy family.
They do. So they do list the other candidates.
Oh, good.
There. So yeah, we got to give them that. They do have some wild side bets too, by the way. Like, will Donald Trump say crypto in his Elon Musk interview? Someone apparently made a fortune on that.
That's the fun part. It is purely fun. It's purely fun, but there is some science in it. The challenge is when you read that and say that, oh, she's leading. She's not leading. And good polling data is actually what you need to do. The reality is polling data is all over the map. So what we tend to do is we use a series of averages. To just speak about the polling data, when you have a tight race like this, a lot of presidential races are tight because that's the way America kind of pans out into its ideological divides. Then you can't go by the national polling numbers because they're within the margin of error, right? They're 2 points away, which is not a lead. That's within the margin of error. You're forgiven if you think that's a lead because every single pundit on the planet who is educated at the best schools in the country makes that mistake. It's just a common mistake to make. When you're 2 points ahead, you're not leading. So when you have a national poll, all it tells you is it's too close to tell. So you have to look at other data, which is the swing states, right? And in fact, let me show you this. This is what we're, this is, oh, well, I'm not allowed to do it. So that we're just going to cancel that and I'll speak to it directly. That's a user error on technology, and we'll pretend that didn't happen. The point is, when you look at the swing states and you look at the RCP average of polls, all of them are within the margin of error. When you're looking at the averages, you have to look at the larger thing, which is about 4 points and up. So if they're 4 points apart, then you can say, yeah, someone's getting a little bit of a lead. But if I was brilliant enough to open, if I was a 5-year-old and I opened my screen sharing capably, you would see that each one of these different 7 states is under 3 points. 3 points or under. They're all tied. All you can tell is they're tied. So in terms of, if I'm going to make an actual bet on this, I'm betting the mortgage because it matters, I'm not making a bet one way or another. Now, if I'm messing around and I'm betting drinking money, then I'm following Poly and going to bet in it because they're doing other inputs. And I suspect the biggest input they have, aside from all the others, and it's a fabric, is fundraising, right? Because Trump is absolutely getting mopped this month with fundraising. And that is your biggest indicator, I think, in this case. And given that their comms has been very careful about moderating their introduction of Kamala Harris, so they're doing the right thing. I think they're right in terms of where gravity is probably heading. But is she ahead? No, not at all.
So kind of to recap, one, national polls are always problematic because they don't reflect the electoral college voting, which is how we pick a president, at least for now. There seems to have been some efforts to abolish it and some very colorful descriptions of
when you lose, change the rules.
Yeah. National polls are not good indicators in general. And then what you're pointing out, even when you go now and break down and look at the battle state polls, if it's not a 4-point lead, it's not a solid, most arguably not a lead at all. It's within the margin of error. And maybe actually really quick, explain that concept of margin of error to people.
Sure. So the two critical components of every poll are the margin of error and the confidence interval. Those two things mean they reflect the methodological inputs, assuming those inputs are correct, which most of the time they're okay. I mean, that's the reality. Not all of them are terribly good. Some are better than others. And what they mean is if you were to conduct that poll over 100 times, so if you have a 4% margin of error with a 95% confidence interval, and most of them are 95%, if I was going to repeat that 100 times, I have a 95% likelihood of getting the same results. So within 4 points, that's the key thing. Within 4 points is margin of error. And most are, with 4 points or so, because the reality is you have to expand the sample size exponentially large to decrease from 4 points down to 3, from 3 points down to 2, and so forth. And the cost inputs are just not worth it. So that's why when we look at all this sort of thing, we're really looking for that 4 points and out. And this is invariably what is misread.
And that's very different from probability. And when we want to, we can talk a little bit about how to kind of gauge that discussion of probability and what they're talking about in Polycom and Nate talks about.
Absolutely.
So probability, I think Nate Silver has pretty much the perfect, and I'm going to clumsily rephrase this, but the perfect illustration of what probability means. People think of probabilities all the time. They just don't really think about it. So if you are watching the weather in the morning and you walk to work, and there's a 30% chance of rain, you might bring an umbrella because that's enough of a probability that you think it might happen. It's the same thing with the presidential race. If there's a 30% chance that Donald Trump is going to win, just throwing numbers out there, for example, in 2016, there's a 30% chance he's going to win. And Nate Silver got clobbered for that. It still means he's got a chance he's going to win.
Yeah.
And that's why, for the most part, people who bet for a living can do well, but they don't have their own private island. These things are really, really helpful. They're good predictors, but they're part of a constellation of good predictors. None of it's set in stone. And anyone who judges one of these predicting algorithms as needing to be accurate 100% all the time, come on, give me a break. It's just, that's not the world we live in.
Well, my old line of work, the joke was that there are two outcomes of operations. There are operational successes and intelligence failures. So
that's right. You need to put blame where it belongs.
The guys were supposed to predict things got it wrong, so we failed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we did a great job. So excellent.
Higher stakes in that world.
Debate that. They get defense sometimes. Actually, I could probably debate that on all counts. But maybe more immediate disastrous results.
Well, again, it's a different worldviews. Remember, I view the world through rose-tinted glasses. Somewhat darkly, yes, but they're still rose-tinted. So, for example, I think this funny system of ours is actually remarkably resilient. So, So the sorts of things about elections and so forth being so starkly painted as this is the end of the world and so forth. I know that's not what you're saying, but just to posit it, I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that's necessarily the case in the long term.
It's often overlooked, and I don't even know if we seem to have civics education in this country anymore. But the founding fathers believed wholeheartedly, deeply, that politicians were the biggest scumbags to ever walk the planet Earth. They wrote Federalist paper after Federalist paper about this. They said, look, they're corrupt scumbags, and the best government is one that can barely get anything done. That's the feature. And it stands in stark contrast to something like socialism. The founding fathers assumed the worst in human beings and built a government. And socialism and communism requires the best in human beings to operate. One has arguably delivered a bit more than the other, but I think it's so interesting when people expect political leaders to be like honest and forthright, and like that is not their job,
right?
Speaking of voters, there's a very interesting poll that came out. I'm going to check. I want to give them credit because I keep wanting to say Polymarket, and Polymarket is certainly not it. A Paradigm has come out with some polling about crypto voters, and before talking about, they focused on Democrats most recently. I'd be curious what you think, Justin. They did a previous one on Republican crypto voters, but I think it came out just right about when Biden was landing the plane in Rehoboth to relax for the rest of his presidency, shall we say. And do you think it's still valid? Was Harris coming into the race that big of an upheaval? Or do we maybe go back and look at the crypto Republican data from Paradigm, even if it is pre or early Kamala-ish? Well, what do you think of that? Has the race changed that much?
No, I don't see the race changing that much. I mean, it's tightened up, but we were talking about tightenings of 5 points here and there, which is better. That's political races are iterative, and they're won in small pieces. The race has changed enough so that now former President Trump is on his back foot, and Kamala Harris is on her front foot. That matters. but there's not a definitive winner or definitive loser, right? So the contours of the race are changing. That matters. I struggle. I read the article you sent over, the both of them, and with respect to Paradigm, which is a respected organization, and with respect to Mercury Analytics, which fielded the data, and who I work with, also highly respected organizations. They're both respected. I think you have to recognize that everyone gets paid for a living, and you need to kind of look at the data and see if their interpretation really lines up with yours, because it may not. For me, I was left with some confusion, and I may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but I can read a number or two. The June poll, for example, one of the headlines was, and I wanted to share this, but again, stultified by my inability to do the most basic things technologically. Republicans embrace crypto. And the lead for that was 28% of Republicans either hold or had held crypto. But 17% of that 28%, so a plurality within that 28%, had owned it in the past. Only 11% hold it now, right? That 11% are active investors. So what does that beg? What's the difference between those two? And what's the answer to why? I held it, but I don't hold it now. There's a myriad of different reasons, right? We don't know why. We don't know if that's because they became disenchanted. We don't know if they just simply don't have the available funds to. We have absolutely no. We don't know if they cashed out and they are living on a private island. We have zero understanding of the why. We definitely don't know that Republicans embrace crypto is the right art landline. For me, 11% is not Republicans embracing anything. That's a small proportion of people who are behaving in a way that's interesting. Embrace is a plurality or a majority. That's holding something close, right? And if it really matters, you're at super majority. That's what I start to call, that's the gold of life. When you've got 65, 66% of people coalescing around something, that's an embrace. That's lovemaking. 11%? That ain't shit. I'm sorry.
So I mean, it's interesting to put that into context. One thing from a market's perspective, read somewhat anecdotally, but when Morgan Stanley, when Goldman Sachs issues a statement, they can go to prison for talking something up or down that they don't necessarily believe in. And so I say that because I always weight what they say a little more heavily with regards to Bitcoin and Bitcoin buying and pressures driving the price up. Something that a lot of the financial analysts who go to prison for talking things up have stated is that retail investors have not fully returned. The big retail buy seem to be going on around stimulus payments or COVID payments, and it doesn't seem to have come back. So it's an assumption. But it is possible that people were, you had a lot of retail investors that were putting $30, $50, $100 in, kind of the whole GameStop phenomenon. It could be a lot of those people put their money in, cashed out, hopefully when it was high, and haven't been really ready to jump in yet. Sounds like you see that being teased perhaps in the polling. Financial analysts have sort of suggested that. So maybe that's the phenomenon. But the stat that the crypto industry has deployed with great effect. So be curious how you balance this statement against that percentage of 28% actually holding. I think you said 11% actually currently holding crypto. Is Coinbase's public policy efforts? They did some polling, and they say I think it's one in 5 Americans owns crypto. So it makes me wonder how they define the word "own" in there. But then they say that 1 in 6 swing voters owns crypto. So that comes in around, right? Roughly that same number. But what do you think of the that 1 in 5 voter potentially voting on this issue versus it being really 11% of Republicans who tend to favor crypto holding it? Like, how do you think you balance all that out kind of in the wash?
Well, it's what's in the wash that matters, right? And very few people are single issue voters. I think that's one of the challenges here. It's a relatively small proportion, and I think the crypto industry needs to recognize that they're talking numbers that are quite small. And when policymakers are listening to polling numbers, they're typically listening to numbers that, again, are pluralities or majorities. When you go in front of an elected and are saying, I want this enacted or this protected, usually you've got some pretty good stuff to sell. Everybody loves this, right? Or pretty close to everybody, meaning you, sir or ma'am, will have no harm done to you if you align with my particular agenda. In the best case, you, sir or ma'am, will have your halo burnished by what I'm bringing to you on the silver platter, right? That's the stuff we sell in capitals. And again, because elected officials have one job first and foremost, and that job is to get reelected. It's so that they can do their job as an elected official. Respecting that reality, that's what you're trying to do in some form or another in advocacy and what you're doing for numbers. The challenge here is that and we can kind of peel that onion a variety of different ways in terms of what does it actually mean. That is interesting. But the challenge for the crypto industry is are people actually casting votes based on the 11%, or maybe it's 25%, depending on what demographic it is, maybe it's 20%, who own crypto and actively are engaged with it now. Are they voting based on that and that alone? We have no indication that that's the case. None of the research has suggested it. I think it would be terrific research that needs to be done, but it's not there. And a lot of it's clunky, that democratic, that follow-up paradigm item. Their takeaway was, democratic crypto voters are up for grabs in November, but what they were presenting was people who say that they're not voting for Kamala Harris or Democratic. They didn't make it clear, at least I didn't see it there, and it didn't seem obvious, that those were also people who held Democratic voters who held crypto. So that was a struggle for me because it was a fairly big leap without the underlying fundamentals that allow you to make that claim. Maybe it was there, it just wasn't in the article. And then this one, which I love, getting back to margins, 1 to 2%. I'm gonna look down and read this exactly. 1 to 2% of Democrats who may be leaning towards Trump due to the Biden administration's hostility to crypto. I didn't see anywhere that question actually being asked. It was just do you hold crypto and who you're voting for. To suggest that a Democrat is going to vote for Trump is a big leap. And to draw that connection of why, causality, is an even bigger leap. And then to draw that with the 1 or 2%, I mean.
And is that 1 or 2% beyond the margin of error?
It's so far within the margin of error because it's a subset within a subset of a subset that it's just magic. It's pure magic.
So, a couple of things. By the way, the articles that we talk about, we're going to post those in our Medium, plus some additional analysis. So you can go there and tell us, let's see, we're idiots, deep state assets, communists, Trump supporters. I'm sure we'll get the occasional racist thrown in there.
Yes, party card here for.
So yeah, we are looking at this from a bipartisan fashion and being kind of cold and analytical. I think for the crypto crowd that may start forming lynch mobs around this, the fact that it's talked about at all is astounding. It shows what's happened over 13, 14-ish years. The fact there's any mention of it is astounding. So, take heart that, Bitcoin and crypto just kind of got to the big kids table. And, we talked about, kind of last week, the disappointment that Trump didn't hold a symposium on immersion cooling at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. Never going to happen. Maybe in 10 years you get a Bitcoiner that is successful and decides to run for office, who's into mining, for higher office. You're going to see them in other places. So it's amazing, but I think this is interesting. There's so little polling done on it. I think people are really stretching to try to put any insights together into a group of people that, by the way, talk about someone who doesn't want to pick up the phone and take a survey. It's got to be what's generally a pretty privacy-focused Bitcoiner.
And by the way, that was one of the two big takeaways that I got from those two data sets, which were interesting and warrant looking at. By the way, they were interesting. They were thoughtful. And who did they research? They researched via panel, right? So that by nature excludes certain folks. So you have to you're not looking at exact numbers, which is again why 1 or 2% mean nothing. You're looking for deltas. Yeah. That's how you read that data. That deltas matter. And one of the big deltas that I saw, which you just mentioned, privacy, one of the big takeaways was Americans do not like their private affairs visible to the Fed, especially their financial affairs. They just don't like it, period. So it doesn't matter if they're Republican, Democratic. You're at 70% plus who say, I don't want anything visible to the Fed. That's a massive number. A lot of times when people are looking at these numbers, they say, well, I want to see, what about 8 out of 10, 90%? That's a big number. Yeah. It's an unheard of number. You might get 90% of people in a small town who love their fire department. And that could happen, but it's very, very rare. To get 70% plus people say, look, I don't like to have the government poking around in my private financial affairs. Massive number, massive coalescence. That's a huge thing that the crypto industry should be looking at. And then the other item is there's a pronounced greater appetite for crypto that I saw in those numbers among people with color. That's interesting. Both sides of the ideological divide should be finding that interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot when you look at the unbanked and underbanked, which puts you to about 30 million people, which is a disproportionately minority audience, where you see interest. And crypto, despite the stereotype of the zip sweatered libertarian crypto bro who eats steak 14 times a week, it's actually remarkably diverse in its ownership. In the industry, I think it's like everything else involving computers, a bunch of kind of nerdy white guys. But it's actually surprisingly diverse when you get down to those numbers. Now, there is one number in there that I did want to ask you about, because I think it may drive a lot of progressive Democratic messaging. And I'll start with Pew. Has over a couple of election cycles pointed out that for like 9 of 10 Democrats, the environment is an important issue, and it is a core part of why people vote Democratic. Starting about 2 years ago, you had a Dear Colleague letter that went all around the Hill that started these attack lines that Bitcoin is environmentally damaging. You've seen a chorus of progressives attack Bitcoin. They usually use one of two tacks. One, they claim it's used for money laundering, which is funny because you generally, in almost every case, turn your Bitcoin into fiat, which requires a bank, which means the banking industry is complicit, but they skip over that. And then the other one is the electricity use, and are they using renewable energy and the like. And there's I forget his name, we'll post something about him, guy who's really debunked a lot of the attacks by pointing out how flawed the methodology is. But 9 in 10 Democrats care about the environment. It's a huge impact on how they vote. And in that polling data, it was a very powerful or compelling number of white liberals that did not seem to like Bitcoin very much. So what do you think of that? If you're advising the Harris campaign, you leave no stone unturned because you're trying to win. You have a lot of money, a lot of people thinking. So if you're worried about those 1 in 5, 1 in 6 swing voters and fracturing a group that's supporting Trump, where does that how do you balance pro-environment and pro-crypto at the same time? Or is it worth the effort? What are your thoughts?
They're just, if I was advising them, if in terms of voters, I don't know as it's worth the effort. I haven't seen the numbers that suggest that it's actually worth the investment of effort. And the reason why I'm saying that is not because those voters are immaterial, but because you have a limited amount of airtime. And when you're raising those $300 million a month, you have to put those $300 million somewhere, right? You have to spend in order to communicate. As I mentioned earlier, that races are iterative. So yes, you do want to pick up little groups of people along the way. It could very well be that some messaging can be useful but you have to balance that against all that constellation of other messaging you have to do. I haven't seen a lot of indication that those who own and trade in crypto are so driven by that one issue that it would overwhelm their interest in other issues and would warrant that kind of laser focus on communication. It may be there. I just, so far, I haven't seen the data that supports that conclusion. Now, however, if there's a visceral dislike for Bitcoin, Kamala Harris is not going to educate people on why Bitcoin is good or bad. That's a bad approach, right? You got to respect reality. If your constituency hates Bitcoin, then you're going to raise your arm and say, I hate Bitcoin too. It is evil. It belongs to Trump. It is Trumpian in every way possible. That's what you're going to do. You're going to call it with the same brush of perspective that your constituency has, which leads to Bitcoin has a brand problem among progressives, and they need to think about that. They need to fix it because that costs a lot of money over time, and they need to message it. But in terms of the crypto industry, right? And I don't know if we quite got into that topic in full depth, but I think we're there, and it's okay to dig into it a little bit more. That back and forth between we use a whole lot of energy, we don't use a whole lot of energy, right? That tit for tat, because that's what they're being accused of, energy consumption. And by default, if you're using a lot of energy, then you are bad for the environment. This is an easy linear argument, right? We hear that, we get it.
Yeah,
it makes sense. So, Bitcoin takes a lot of energy to mine. We understand that too. Most people understand that, even folks who don't trade in it. What I'm seeing in the crypto industry is a lot of what you described, and there's value in it, is that debunking of an assumption, right? Just because something uses a lot of energy, does it actually use a lot of energy in inputs, right? Are you assuming that it's using coal energy versus it may actually be using renewable energy? There's all these different things, and then are the methodological inputs in that assessment incorrect? I understand all that, and that's valuable. You want to position facts against facts and see which way gravity goes. That's all valuable. On the other hand, that's usually not what wins over voters. What tends to win over voters, especially in high energy, and you and I are from California, so this is something that we understand particularly well, is what is the benefit that you get from consuming all that energy? And all the other stuff is supporting cast. Let me use an example. In California, in Southern California, where all true, wonderful Californians live,
it's the real California, those Chardonnay sipping Yankees up in the north.
That's right. That's right. So is a desert, right? That's the problem. And since time immemorial, Southern California has had a water problem, which is really, if you understand it, it's a transmission problem. Now,
which we've worked on, water issues.
That's exactly right. And and transmission and all the other components, but ultimately transmission, that problem doesn't get resolved easily. There's a whole lot to it. There's a movie made about it, by the way, Chinatown, one of the greatest movies of all time. But that thing isn't really going to get solved anytime soon, if ever. So Southern California it has to deal with the water sources that they have. And since no new water has been created, you don't go to a lab and make water really. We're all kind of drinking, in one way or another, we're drinking refuse, right? Dinosaur pee or salinated water or something along those lines. So you have ways to go at it. Those ways to go at it take a lot of energy. Desalination takes a lot of energy. Extraordinarily effective stuff. Really interesting if you're geeky and like that sort of thing, like I do. Used to tremendous effect throughout the Arab Peninsula, and certainly in Israel, a number of different places. And in California, it's used to affect when it passes all those different ecological barriers that something in California has to pass. But it takes a ton of energy. How do you make that pass in those environments, which is something, again, we do. You have to communicate to people that the value of what they're getting outweighs the inputs, what they're spending. Yes, and everyone in coastal California really is hyper aware of energy use, wants to be a good steward of the environment, doesn't want to throw this stuff away and pollute the environment. You have to show that, yes, there's a lot of energy, but it turns out the outputs are that much more beneficial. And I never, ever, ever see that with crypto. No one ever says, by the way, the benefit of crypto outweighs all the inputs that we're talking about. It really matters.
And putting kind of the comms hat on, I think to start there and work back, it's tougher because all that $25,000, depending on estimates, could be a little lower, could be a little higher, worth of electricity you kind of think on average goes into one Bitcoin. And I think 5, 6 Bitcoins, maybe a used one, buys you a McLaren. And so, and I know they love those in LA. So rolling down to Venice Beach in your McLaren and explaining that the megawatts, perhaps, forgive me if I got the math wrong, could be kilowatts worth of electricity that went into you being able to buy the McLaren has the same community benefit as the water desalination plant. It's
really hard.
It's tough.
And really hard when everyone in that environment has watched all their utilities skyrocket along with all their other costs, right? Costs of water keep going up. Cost of electricity keeps going up. That's fine in your McLaren, but it's not fine for, the 90% of other people who, whether they're in Santa Ana or Riverside or wherever else they may be living throughout Southern California, are struggling to make ends meet. We know 30% of people actually find it really hard to pay their monthly utility bills. You have to communicate that to them. That's your audience, right?
And let's flip the other side again before we alienate all 11 people that might want to watch this. So we're talking about kind of the democratic messaging and the challenge. On the other side of it, what does, and by the way, there's Bitcoin, there's crypto, and that's where I think we can talk about that in a second. There's an opening for Kamala Harris strategically. But when we talk about proof of work versus proof of stake. But on the plus side, Bitcoin encourages innovation. It's literally built into the smart contracts that the blockchain operates on. You have to figure out how to do high performance computing and get more powerful and more energy efficient. And I think industry is really responding to that now. And those advances are high performance computing advances, not Bitcoin mining advances. And that means it improves AI, it improves other things. And lastly, on the plus side, off-grid, behind the meter, my favorite. We have flare gas that is wasted. It's natural gas that you can't put in a pipeline. Staggering amounts when you look it up, like just mind-boggling. We have all of this waste energy in this country. It's not doing anything. And Bitcoin miners can show up with these mobile data centers they put on the back of a flatbed truck, hook up a generator, and burn the methane out of the gas and provide an environmental solution that couldn't be used for anything else. So there are definitely some pluses, but that's as you pointed out with explaining, drinking wastewater, that is a lot of public education. And, it's worth noting that within the cryptocurrency community, Bitcoin, of course, is the king. And we talk about branding, it's give me a Coke, whether it's a Coca-Cola or not. But at the same time, it's somewhat unique. Ethereum, most of the other large blockchains, which are dwarfed in the price of the coin, I'll grant you, but they're actually proof of stake, which is they don't use mining nodes that use electricity to mine. So I think that is the Harris campaign's opportunity, if they care, which you've made a lot of points that, we need to see some more polling to be sure that they really should care. But I can say proof of work mining, Bitcoin, the coin's orange, Donald Trump is, the orange Hitler devil, and I don't support that, but I do support crypto, proof of stake, and that piece. And so, I think for the Bitcoin maxis who are often pretty harsh in their descriptions of the rest of the crypto community, I think this is kind of a wake-up call that they need to all start figuring out how to cooperate, because you're already a small part of the pie and you don't want to get any smaller. No one's ever found balkanization to be a good thing.
You're exactly right, and I agree with you. That is the lane for Harris if she goes down. There's just a chasm in between what people are going to perceive in terms of energy use and so forth. There's a lot of other benefits in terms of what that creates, as opposed to just creating wealth for those who create it. There's businesses that are running on that underlying technology in a variety of different ways. You can really get to things that benefit communities and benefit the U.S. and benefit to another stage of the world. Although Americans don't typically care about that latter item. The kind of the final warning in terms of to Bitcoin and underlining the importance of this, the importance of finding alliances within your natural alliance base.
be forewarned. Look at history, and if you want to look at an industry that struggles in a targeted environment, Bitcoin has the very real probability, I would say, not possibility, probability of becoming the next big oil. It's got the same problems in terms of perception. It is an easy to make, target an enemy. You can dump on it for a variety of reasons. That argument is really easy to make. It may not be right. And this is not a question of fairness or is it factually correct. The question is, what is it effective towards someone's career politically, and garnering support? And unfortunately, for like it or not, good or ill, Bitcoin's an easy target. If they want to avoid that high taxation, high regulation space, which is where they will end up, because that's the way that they look and feel like oil to a certain faction of politicians, then they really need to start thinking about how they strategize their communications, both to the American public and to the folks who create those legislation and pass those taxes. And have you ever heard of windfall profit tax? That's coming your way, Bitcoin.
Well, I think on 2 occasions, the Biden-Harris administration's tried a 30% tax. I think it's on the electricity used to mine. And, I think you left out the key point, which is if you really want to make change in these issues, they should call us because
yes, of course,
we can actually help sell red tinged ideas in blue places. But we're kind of over on time. So let me talk very briefly, because it's something to get into more detail in the future. And I'm on the foreign policy and national security side. Russia's overhauled its regulations regarding cryptocurrency mining and I think some cryptocurrency distribution. And this is one of those events that will seem a lot more significant, in the richness and fullness of time, maybe, than it does immediately. But Russia's part of something called BRICS. BRICS is an alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and I got it, yeah. And then they have kind of some more affiliates, and they've begun to position this as the global South versus the global North. And I think they're just a few years away, maybe by 2030. In terms of GDP, this global South, really led by BRICS, will rival the G7, I think it is, in terms of GDP. And so they're on the rise. One of their biggest initiatives long term is they talk about de-dollarization. And so, when I look at what Russia's doing, you have China easing up its restrictions / maybe they never exactly happened, since Bitcoin mining has been going on in China and hasn't stopped. Ironically, by the way, Chinese Bitcoin mining is like all renewable. There's some dam that has all this power, and that's I can't remember where it's at. It's kind of ironic.
Ask the Vietnamese how they like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Plenty of fans of China all around the world. But nevertheless, BRICS countries are changing their tune on cryptocurrency. And the reason that I look at this and I find it disconcerting, and we can talk about grid and hash rate at another time, but is just that this is a very effective way to de-dollarize. And so the idea in de-dollarization is that the U.S. dollar is no longer used as the currency to settle payments. Now, the strength of the dollar is one reason you do it. The second reason is the U.S. controls the banking system. So the reason why the U.S. can levy sanctions so effectively is because literally the U.S. has their hand on the spigot and can turn it off and on. A CBDC, which is a government-backed and authorized cryptocurrency, could settle payments without you needing to use the current banking system in the dollar. So the infrastructure, the experimentation is taking place in these BRICS countries. And the biggest players within BRICS are pushing this. So is this some raise the DEFCON status to Pentagon, we're all going to die kind of thing? It's immediate? No. But it's a very clear message. And I'll just add this, which should be very, very concerning. The Saudis are showing up at these BRICS events. And you may not like the Saudi human rights record, but like 49.5% of Saudi Arabians love us more than anybody in the world. And the other 49.5% want us all to die. So that country's on a razor's edge. They are a vital ally in containing Iran in the Middle East. And we don't need them going out on dates with people that want to pay them in electro rubles and weaken our relationships.
Yeah, I think that we'd like to spend some time talking about alliances just in general at some point, because it actually does reflect what we just talked about in the business community. You know, does Bitcoin need alliances? You know, it does. Just like America needs alliances, and sometimes those alliances are with organizations or with countries that do not reflect 100% of America's viewpoint, because the world is different. Apparently, we're supposed to value that until it gets creepy.
Well, we value it until they don't do it. There's actually a pretty ironic alignment. It's always that way until you do something I don't agree with.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the world will be nicer when everyone just does what I think.
Good, bad, I'm a guy with a gun.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And America carries a big gun. But it can't be everywhere, and it's not effective everywhere, right? I mean, there are other forms of diplomacy that are arguably much more effective, depending on the time, and that's a challenge. When Saudi Arabia is out looking at these other relationships, it is a concern. It absolutely is a concern. It should be taken seriously, and this is one of those canaries in a coal mine. And if the policyholders don't look at it carefully, then it could very well have significant ramifications down the line.
Yeah, we as we used to say when I was in Iraq, you can't buy a tribe, but you can rent one, and that's how it works.
Anyone who's
my enemy's my
Arabia gets that, right? If you read his notes and books and so forth that he wrote, there's a myriad of other things on it. It's the same thing. Understand the practical realities of the environment.
Well, as we wrap up, I'll leave you with two things. One, he worked for 10 years, but Gertrude Bell, this English aristocrat, became an Arabist and then worked at the Arab Bureau and was instrumental in kind of the Lawrence Arabia program. One of the reasons why Lawrence Arabia had so many problems when the war ended was he was one of many, actually, of Lawrence of Arabia that were running around. And that doesn't sell newspapers. There had to be one, and so this bothered him to some extent. But he contributed to Gertrude Bell. I think it was handbook for Mesopotamia for the armies of the British Empire, or something, 1917. I forget the exact title, but she wrote an ethnographic handbook. I used it when I was in Iraq, and some of the spellings changed. And they don't call one province after the tribe anymore for very obvious reasons, that the tribe was too powerful. But outside of some minor changes, we were using that 1917 handbook because it still applied entirely to modern day Iraq and their tribal issues.
That's amazing.
So that was kind of wild. And I used to love, particularly the State Department, easily the most competent professional branch of our government. When they came in, I heard a Marine general once said of them when asked that he wasn't sure what they did, but they were very good at making themselves comfortable. And that was the nicest thing he could say about them, which was my experience. They were exceptionally comfortable at all times in Iraq, regardless of what was happening. But there was a quote, something to the effect of, better the Arab do it himself than you do it for him. And under the odd conditions of Arabia, your work may not be quite as good as you think. I plastered that on every document. I put that on like anywhere I could get it, if it was going up somewhere to be staffed, so they would see that. I just love doing that. They didn't listen, and the results speak for themselves. But
well, next time, I also want to talk a little bit about another one of your experiences in terms of, to the degree that you can, in terms of the how impactful parallel monetary systems can be. There was the parallel monetary systems in the Muslim world that help support terrorism, and there, when you start to take banking out of the play with the U.S. dollar, very important, impactful things can happen, right?
It is. Hawalas. I was on think it was Fox, when this ridiculous assumption that crypto is financing Hamas came up. And I was like, no professional in their right mind would ever say that. It's a Wallen network. Why would I log on? And so we'll wrap up with this. How Wallen networks work. You go to someone you know in wherever city in the world, and you say, I need to get some money to my village in, say, in Somalia. And they make a phone call. Hey, someone's coming to pick up the money. The whole transaction's settled for you within a couple of minutes. And then the Hawalas or Hawala Dars meet, and then they resolve their transactions at some point. Western Union got beat by about 1,000 years in the Arab world, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, amazing stuff and powerful. I mean, that has effect. Where does the financing come from? How do people are they able to reach across the globe? There you go.
So with that, again, what we talk about here, we've tried to we'll post the articles that we looked at on our Medium. We'll put a little bit of analysis in, and again, feel free to yell at us for not agreeing with you, or tell us how smart we are because we do agree with you. Either one works for us.
And that's all for this week on the Crypto Swamp Creatures.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the intersection of crypto, politics, and policy.
Remember, the data doesn't lie, and neither do we. Well, not about anything important anyways.
Until next time, stay informed, stay skeptical, stay out of the swamp.